My name is Emily. I worked in marketing for a mid-sized software company for 5 years. And for most of that time, my direct manager, David, took credit for nearly everything I built. It didn't happen all at once. It started small, a slide in a presentation, where my name quietly disappeared from the prepared by line. A campaign I'd spent 3 weeks developing, presented to the executive team as David's strategy, while I sat in the same room, watching him describe ideas I'd written out in a shared document he'd read the night before. At first, I told myself it was just how corporate hierarchy worked. Managers present, teams execute. That's normal, I thought. I didn't want to seem petty about something so small. But it kept happening, year after year, and it was never really that small. In my 3rd year, I developed a client retention campaign for one of our mid-tier accounts, Halden Manufacturing, that ended up performing better than anyone expected. A 14% increase in renewal rate, the kind of number that gets noticed at quarterly reviews. David presented the results himself, called it a strategy I'd been developing, and received a spot bonus for it. I got a 2-line mention in his slide deck, buried under a bullet point that said Team Execution, Emily R. I brought it up with him once carefully in a one-on-one. I said I felt like my contributions weren't being reflected accurately to leadership. He looked genuinely confused, or maybe just performed confusion well. Emily, everyone on the team knows how much you do. I always mention you in our internal meetings. Leadership just likes hearing things from a director-level voice. That's just how the reporting structure works. It sounded reasonable enough that I let it go again. I told myself the work mattered more than the recognition, and mostly, I believed it. By year 4, I was quietly managing our 2 largest client relationships, almost entirely on my own. Strategy, execution, day-to-day communication, while David handled the internal politics and relationship with our own executives. One of those clients was Bramwell Retail Group, a company that had been with our agency for 6 years and represented close to 18% of our department's total billing. I'd built that relationship personally. Their VP of marketing, a woman named Carol, and I spoke almost weekly. She trusted me specifically, not the agency in the abstract. David knew this. He also knew, better than I did at the time, how valuable that relationship was to his own standing with our CEO. Everything shifted in the spring of my 5th year. I'd been quietly unhappy for a while, tired of watching my work translated into someone else's career advancement, but I hadn't done anything about it, beyond occasional complaining to my husband over dinner. Then a recruiter reached out about a director-level position at a competing agency, not a real title, not just more responsibility with the same invisible credit. I went to the interview mostly out of curiosity, half expecting nothing to come of it. 2 rounds in, sitting across from their VP of client strategy, I learned something that stopped me cold. They were actively trying to win Bramwell Retail Group's business. Carol's contract with our agency was up for renewal in 4 months, and apparently, she'd already had preliminary conversations with 2 competing firms, unhappy with what she described as inconsistent points of contact and declining strategic input from our side. I hadn't heard a word about any of this internally. David had been handling the renewal conversations directly for the past 2 months, cutting me out of a client relationship I'd spent years building, without explanation. I didn't say anything to the interviewer about my personal connection to that account. I finished the interview professionally, went home, and sat with what I'd learned for several days. The truth was simpler than I wanted it to be. David had been slowly inserting himself into my client relationships for months, not to help me, but to make himself indispensable to leadership in case anything happened to my role, or in case I ever tried to leave. I wasn't imagining the pattern. I had just been too invested in keeping the peace to name it clearly, even to myself. I accepted the position at the new agency 6 weeks later. I gave proper notice, 2 full weeks, and offered to help transition my accounts, which David declined, telling leadership he'd already been closely involved with the major ones and didn't need my input. What David didn't know, and what I hadn't mentioned to anyone at my old company, was that during my final weeks, Carol had reached out to me personally, outside of any formal channel, asking if I was staying in the industry. She said, plainly, that the agency relationship had felt hollow for over a year, ever since I'd stopped being her primary point of contact. When I told her where I was headed, she asked without hesitation whether my new agency would be interested in pitching for Bramwell's business. I told my new employer the truth. I had a personal, trusted relationship with a client who was already unhappy and actively looking. 6 weeks after I started, My new agency won the Bramwell Retail Group account in a competitive pitch. Carol later told me, over coffee, that the decision had very little to do with strategy decks or pricing. I just wanted to work with someone who actually listened, she said. That was always you, not the company. I heard about the fallout secondhand, through a former coworker who still worked under David, losing an account worth close to 18% of departmental revenue. 4 months after I left, raised uncomfortable questions from the executive team. Questions about client relationship management, about why such a significant account had been reassigned. Internally, without proper transition planning, about why the person who'd apparently managed it best for years was no longer in the building. I don't know exactly what was said in those meetings. I wasn't there, and honestly, I didn't need to be. I didn't leave to punish David. I left because I was tired of building things that quietly became someone else's story. The fact that Bramwell followed wasn't some calculated plan. It was simply what happened when a client relationship built on real trust outlasted a job title built on borrowed credit. At my new agency, my name is on the work. When I present a strategy, it's mine, in the room, out loud, with my title attached to it. It's a small thing, maybe, to some people. To me, after 5 years of quietly disappearing from my own accomplishments, it's not small at all. I don't know if David ever fully understood what happened, or if he still tells the story some other way in his own head. But I know Carol's honesty that day, over coffee, mattered more to me than any bonus or bullet point ever did. Someone finally saying, plainly, that they'd noticed exactly who had been doing the work all along. If this story felt familiar, hit subscribe. New stories of quiet, strength, and workplace justice every single day. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever watched someone else take credit for your work? And what did you do about it?